Alright, so in the last video we talked about algorithms. We talked about different types of algorithms, what an algorithm is, and in our syllabus, the different ways of representing an algorithm. We talked about structured English, there was pseudocode, then also flowcharts. So in this video, we'll be going into a bit more detailed about with regards to structured English. We'll be talking about what it is, some guides, some guidelines, some rules to follow so that we can write good structured English. We're going to be talking about it. We're going to look at an example, and we're also going to talk about stepwise refinement with that example in mind. So let's begin. So structured English is pretty simply the algorithm written as a series of steps, in English. So we're using English sentences, English grammar, plain English words that we would use in our daily life. So not code at all. So when we write structured English, there are a few guidelines we should follow so that we can make it concise and very clear to anyone who reads that structured English what's going on, basically. So like the first of these many guidelines is that when you're writing structured English, your variable names should be obvious. So if you were to translate your structured English into like code or even pseudocode, then it should be clear what part of your structured English needs to be a variable. Like for example, if I wrote take as input, let's say this was instruction 1. If I wrote take as input the let's say the time. So this statement makes it very clear that when I take as input the time, in code I can make a variable called time and store some value in it. So yeah, we can do that. So that should be obvious when you write your own structured English. And similarly, all the different processes that one can do. So for example, you can input output. So input output should be obvious, meaning the words I use. So here I took take as input, and I even explicitly mentioned input. So it was pretty obvious that is what we're doing. So it shouldn't be ambiguous. Are we inputting? Are we outputting? Are we doing a process? Are we doing a calculation? So that shouldn't happen. Similarly, the other processes should also be obvious. So selection should be obvious, and we can do this by using words like choose. We can say choose, we can say select, we can even say if to check against a condition. And same thing goes for repetition. Iteration should be obvious, and this is done by using words like repeat this until blah 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 blah, repeat this until something, some condition, or while this is true, do something. So that kind of indicates what kind of loop you're going to be using. Here you're going to use a repeat until loop, and here you're going to use a while loop, which we'll talk about in detail in the upcoming chapters and videos. So yeah, and finally there's also one more. It should be calculation, or I might even say calculation or processing. What kind of processing you're doing should be obvious. So let's say if you're assigning a value, it should be clear that you're assigning a value. So set this variable as this value. You could write that in structured English and have that be a good structured English statement. So those are the rules of what good structured English is like. Next, we can look at an example. Just 1 second, let me clear this. All of that and all of that. So in the last video, we talked about an example where we converted 12-hour time into 24-hour time, and we built a very general algorithm for that. So let's implement that in structured English. So actually I've gone ahead and written it here. I'll bring it onto the screen. And here you can see we have 4 steps. Our first step is we take as input. Note that I explicitly stated input as suggested with the guidelines that we just discussed. So take as input the time in 12-hour format. And this kind of suggests when we say the time in 12-hour format, this kind of suggests to the user maybe you should save it in a variable, whatever input you take. You should save it in a variable that you can call something like 12-hour time. So that's that. And the second instruction is it's clearly a selection statement because we have set a condition. So if it is in PM, so if the time is in PM, then we add 12 to the hour value. Because if your time is something like 4 p.m., then it's in 24-hour format. It's actually 12 plus 4, 16 o'clock. So we do that. And then we store the new value of our calculation. Oh, also note, I explicitly stated add, and that makes it clear to the reader that a calculation and more specifically, an addition is being performed. So store the new value as 24-hour format, and this again suggests that maybe it's time to store it in a different variable that we call something like 24-hour time maybe. And the final statement is output the 24-hour format. So here very explicitly stated the variable that you just saved, the new 24-hour format time, show that to the user, output it to the user, right? So this is a very crude, very quick example. It's a pretty simple program, nothing much to it. Let's now talk about the concept of stepwise refinement, and then we'll come back to this example. So stepwise refinement, actually I'll keep it up on the screen, just so you can look at it while I talk about stepwise refinement. So when we talk about stepwise refinement, we're basically talking about decomposition. So in the earlier videos, when we talked about abstraction and decomposition, we talked about decomposition as a process of breaking down tasks and problems into smaller tasks and problems that are more simpler to solve, and doing that until you're only solving the very simplest of problems. So that's kind of the concept that we can apply here too. Stepwise refinement is what we call when we apply decomposition to structured English. So if I were to say stepwise refine what I just wrote right here, I could say take as input, so I'm not going to write all that, take as input the time in 12-hour format, but there are a lot of steps that go into it. So I could write like 1.1, I should write take hour value as input. And now we've split it up into, instead of just taking time, now we're taking up an hour value, and similarly take minute value as time. And now we should also take AM or PM as a separate AM or PM as value as input. So yeah, so now you can see what was previously one task is now split up into three smaller simpler tasks. So that's kind of the process of stepwise refinement. And right now it was a pretty simple program, so we could just do it once and have like very simple statements. But when you have more complex programs, you might end up refining it once, twice, or maybe 3 times until you get the most simplest processes that are usually just each one line of code. So for example, take our value as input. This is one line of code, while what I wrote before, this required multiple lines of input statements to be able to take the time as input in its entirety. So that's what structured English is, explained with reference to the example that we did. I hope you found this video helpful. Thank you.